Hello and welcome back, and would you Adam and Eve it, another Synology NAS to talk about here. Genuinely, this is just getting super exciting right now. And Synology's new RS422 Plus 1U rack mount is something that, again, much like the video I did recently on the DS1522 Plus, is a NAS that I think is going to divide opinion ever so slightly. There are things about it I love, there are things about it I'm not sure about, to say the very least. And ultimately, although this isn't a huge amount of information to go on, I think there's enough that I wanted to share it with you. So again, there are a few holes in what we're going to talk about today, and where there are, or if something is a bit TBC or something I'm speculating on, I'll be sure to tell you before I say so. So let's talk about this. The RS422 Plus is a 40 centimeter deep, so sort of half depth rack mount there, but it's a 1U compact rack mount. It's a 4-bay, and this isn't the first time we've seen Synology release a rack mount like this. Again, they've done this. The most recent one was the RS820 Plus, which was an Intel Atom-powered CPU there, the C3538. And although this system has moved towards the Ryzen embedded series, it has taken a slightly different road along the way. Now, by a 4-bay, this is a SATA-based 4-bay there, so again, 4 bays right there on the front. You can fully populate, partially populate, it really does suit you there. The CPU inside this system is part of the Ryzen R1000 series, and that is an AMD Ryzen embedded processor for server 24/7 use. Now, it is the R1600, which is a dual-core processor there that has a 2.6 gigahertz reported clock speed that can be burst when needed up to 3.1 gigahertz there. Now, let's talk a little bit about that CPU before we go any further. So, the thing with this processor, and again, I've talked about this in other videos, I've not had my hands on a system with this processor before, so what I know about this is surprisingly little. Now, the more I've investigated this series, because when we originally talked a couple of years ago about the dawn of when they were utilising the V1500B, I had to really start to learn about this new series of processors there. And I do know that the embedded processor series from AMD that uses the Ryzen architecture, the attitude and the ways in which embedded graphics or graphic handling and encode decode is very different to an Intel architecture. It isn't just a case of embedded graphics on board. Nevertheless, it does play its part. Now, for everything I've seen online, the R1600 does not have on board dedicated graphical components. It can manage graphical tasks, but it doesn't have that dedicated Vega component embedded inside it. Hopefully a screenshot on there will show you a lot of the R1000 series and where this sits alongside them there in terms of graphical input, output, decode, etc. But this processor is arguably a noticeable jump over the Intel that was in that RS820 and indeed the RS819, which was some ARM-based processor there. This is a big jump over both of those 4-bay 1U rack mounts there. But again, a lot of us are still surprised that we kind of thought we might see a Celeron, or just flat out we'd see the 1500B on a new 1U rack mount there. But the more I read into the specifications of this system, the more I find it sits in a very interesting, and by interesting I mean unusual, spot within the existing portfolio. Now, again, a lot of the specifications I'm talking about today have come from numerous Vietnamese e-shops online that have listed this product. So there's no direct data sheet there, so we have to take at least a little bit of a pinch of salt there, but you can do a lot of the Googling after this video to see what I mean. The specifications in terms of memory are listed as 2 gig of ECC DDR4 memory there. Now, there is no mention of this memory being upgradable there, and there's also no mention of that being greater than 2 gig anywhere. We've already talked about the architecture of this CPU in the DS1522 in a previous video, hopefully in the last day or so. So we can already see that that system that arrived with 8 gig, as the 5 bays generally do for the last few years, this one having 2 gig is surprisingly modest. And although, yes, it's a 4-bay system, so 2 gig should be more than enough. The fact that this system has another little sneaky thing at the back that I'll talk about in a moment, I'm surprised 2 gig didn't manifest itself as 4 gig on day one there. What is the feature I'm talking about? Well, the system has the option of a 10 GBE upgrade, but not in the way that we've had it before. It doesn't have a conventional PCIe upgrade slot. What's featured here on the RS422 Rackstation is a dedicated and proprietary 10G upgrade port. Now, it is a slightly rectangular box there. It looks like it's utilizing a smaller connection there. It's either going to be utilizing a modified M2 that's PCIe Gen 2x2, 2x4, or 3x1 there. And we've already talked about M2 to 10GBE adapters in the Data News of the Week videos, thanks to a Realtek processor that was put together that allowed 10GBE over M2 to be utilized. We haven't seen what this adapter looks like at the time of recording, but the idea that this 4-bay can have 10 gigabit Ethernet slapped inside, that's pretty sweet. 4-bays, again, you're maybe going to have to use SSDs to fully saturate 1,000 megabytes per second, and even then it's not fully guaranteed. But the idea that you can use this Synology proprietary adapter known as the E10G22T1 Mini, what a catchy name that isn't, that's still good that you can add 10 GBE to this system. Some might argue it should have had 10 GBE by default, but we still don't know the pricing strategy for this system, so it's very hard to say that off the bat. And again, at least you have the option of that down the line. Now, this is particularly prudent because the default network interfaces on this system are 1 gigabit Ethernet, which is a bit of a bummer. Let's be honest, when we were talking about these things in 2020 and even 2021, we were still wondering when Synology was going to jump on the 2.5 GBE bandwagon. And this system, although that CPU impresses me and the idea of 10 GBE upgradeability impresses me, the fact that it's got 1 GBE still really surprises me in this day and age. And I know 2.5 GBE is nowhere near as ubiquitous as 1 gigabit Ethernet generally, and depending on your utilization of this system, you may not even have to worry about utilizing 2.5 GBE, but still nonetheless, this CPU has the architecture to go bigger than 1 gig. And I don't think the hardware we're seeing on this system would tax the bandwidth of that CPU. There's no mention of things like NVMe SSD slots on this, and I know Synology are a bit give and take when it comes to rack mounts with M2 NVMe slots on there. Again, maybe it's in there and it's just not listed on the sites that I've got this information from, but still nonetheless, I would assume this has NVMe slots on it, the M2s for caching, but this by no means guaranteed. So again, pinch of salt. Again, there's still no word on hard drive compatibility on this, because I think it's going to be very intriguing where a system like this sits on Synology's position on hard drive support and compatibility on their platforms. And again, we talked about it before, it's the idea that Synology is saying that to get the very best out of their systems, they do recommend utilizing their own in-house hard drives. Now, a lot of you aren't overly keen on that and you want to utilize W-Reds and Seagate Iron Wolves. Then Synology have kind of changed a little bit on their position, originally showing systems saying critical and real negative vibes there being thrown out when you use non-Synology hard drives inside. Now they've changed it to a warning, and there are warnings within the system when you are utilizing it, saying that you are using hard drives and SSDs that aren't on the compatibility list, but you can still take advantage of them in pools and volumes. You can still use Smart and do checks on them. But again, Synology do still maintain that they believe their systems work at their best and they can give you the best possible support long term if you use their hard drives. But I know, give and take, there are mixed feelings on this. And the reason I bring that whole thing up is because a 4-bay 1U rack mount is right there on the cusp of home and business user. Synology up to this point have largely maintained that this stance on their own hard drives and SSDs has been very focused on bit higher end business in the 2022 series. Then we look at the excesses, and the lowest tier that had it was the 12-bay RS422 Plus. But this, I think, might be the tipping point. But again, huge conjecture, huge TBC. We'll have to wait and see on that one. The system has a USB port there for storage and stuff, but that's really about it. There's no expansion port on this that really surprised me. There's no option to use the RX418, I believe is the most recent expansion chassis there. And this is what I mean about this system sitting in a weird place within the portfolio there, because if you look at things like the most recent 1U 4-bay, the RX820 Plus, that had an expandability for another 4-bay expansion there. It had the option of a PCIe upgrade there. This system doesn't seem to reach those heights, but it's certainly a grander step than the RS819 more value series 4-bay 1U there. So this sits in a very strange place in the portfolio there. I'm going to be really interested to see where Synology go with this system. But this has been everything we know, in terms of hardware at least, about the RS422 Plus. It will of course support Synology's DS1522 platform, as well as all of the surveillance and business and collaboration and cloud synchronization and C2 services all within this. But we're going to hopefully hear more about this as the year progresses. We still don't know the price. Release-wise, it's got a 2022 on the end. They're probably going to have to release it in the next 2 to 3 months at the very least. I can't see it being released before the end of July. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, chuck me a like. It helps me understand what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. Click subscribe to learn more about any new hardware releases. And of course, as we learn more on these systems, it'll appear here on the channel for you. Otherwise, there's the free advice section over on NAS Compares, manned by me and Eddie the Web Guy, a genuinely free advice service there. Again, it might take us an extra day or so to answer you because it gets very busy down there, but we answer all of your inquiries. And again, there's donate buttons. Use them, ignore them. It's up to you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.